soul songs, every single one of them stopped people in their tracks when it came on. Every single one of them meant something, not just on the charts, but in people's actual lives, in their living rooms, in their cars, at a party that went longer than it was supposed to. I'm sure all would agree that this misery. And if you grew up in the 70s, I really grew up in the 70s, you know every name on this list. You know the feeling that came with each one. You know what song was playing and where you were standing when it hit you. But here's what I want to know. Do you know the stories? Because a lot of these have layers that most people never got to. Now I found out today that so here's the deal. 15 songs. You keep track of how many you remember. And stay with me because some of what I'm about to tell you, I'd be surprised if you knew. Let's start with number 15. Number 15, William Bell, Trying to Love Too, 1977. Of a three-way love affair, caught up in this triangle. Here's something about a man who went quiet for 3 years and came back with a number one hit. William Bell had been in the music business since 1961. I need a 30-hour day, 2 jobs with double pay. He was one of the original Stax Records artists back when Stax was the sound of the South, when Memphis had something to say and the whole world leaned in to hear it. Bell helped shape that sound. He wrote songs that other people turned into legends, and then for 3 full years in the mid-70s, he stopped recording. Hey, it started out as lots of fun, but now it's got... Nobody was really counting. Then 1977 arrives, and Bell walks into the studio and records Trying to Love Too. And the song hits number one on the R&B chart and stays there. Crosses over to number 10 on the pop chart. Sells 1 million copies. Just like that. But here's where it gets interesting. You probably know Born Under a Bad Sign, that brooding, heavy blues standard that Albert King made famous, that Cream took to a whole new audience. That track became one of the most covered songs in blues history, and William Bell co-wrote it. That's his DNA in that song. A man who could write something that dark and bone deep also wrote something as smooth and searching as Trying to Love Too. And then there's this, Billy Idol's 1986 hit, To Be a Lover, one of the biggest rock hits of the year. William Bell wrote and recorded the original version of that song first under the title I Forgot to Be Your Lover. The rock world never knew who it came from. 3 years of silence, a number one comeback, and a catalog that outlasted everyone's memory of his name. If you remember hearing Trying to Love Too on the radio in 1977, you already know what it sounds like when a man is completely honest with himself. That's a rare thing in any decade. Number 14, The Persuaders, Thin Line Between Love and Hate, 1971. Let me paint you a picture. A man keeps coming home in the early morning hours, 3, 4 o'clock, and every single time his wife is there. She lets him in without a word. She doesn't argue. She doesn't make a scene. She just absorbs it night after night after night. And then one morning, the man wakes up in a hospital, head to toe in bandages. He doesn't understand what happened. The Persuaders knew what happened. Thin Line Between Love and Hate, 1971, Atlantic Records. Number 1 on the R&B chart for 2 weeks. Number 15 on the pop chart. Gold record. The song that put a phrase into the English language that we still use today. James Brown once invoked it when talking about race in America. Think about that. The phrase in this song became that big. That'll really, really hurt you one day. The Persuaders were a New York vocal group, and Thin Line was their first single. Their first shot, and they went straight to #1. But what most people don't know is what they left behind after the spotlight moved. They also wrote and originally recorded Some Guys Have All the Luck. You know that one as a Rod Stewart song from 1984. Rod took it to the top 10. The Persuaders got to watch from the sidelines. They also wrote the original version of Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me, which became a massive hit for Gladys Knight and the Pips. Two of the most covered songs of the era, and the names you probably associate with them aren't the Persuaders. And here's the part that still gets me. Charles Stodgill, one of the original members of the group, died of an illness in 1972, just a year after they hit #1. He never got to see how long the song's shadow turned out to be. That title line entered the culture the way only the truest things do, because everybody's been in a situation, whether they want to admit it or not, where they knew exactly which side of that line they were standing on. Real talk, only 9% of you are subscribed. That hurts. We're spending hours digging through archives, fact-checking every detail, bringing these stories back to life. And if you're watching this far, you clearly care. So hit subscribe. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Now, to my subscribers, barely any of you have joined the membership. And honestly, that stings even more. You know the work we put in. You keep coming back. If these videos have ever made you feel something, if this music means something to you, join the membership. It's one coffee a month, and it's the only way we keep this going. Let's build this together. All right, back to it. Number 13, Gene Knight, Mr. Big Stuff, 1971. Right before this song was recorded, Gene Knight was working in a bakery, not performing, not waiting for her big break. She was a baker at Loyola University in New Orleans. She'd tried the music thing earlier, cut a few singles in the 60s that went nowhere, and she had moved on. Music was behind her. Then a songwriter named Ralph Williams called her up and asked if she'd come into the studio. She went. She recorded a track called Mr. Big Stuff, and then she went back to her life because that was all it was supposed to be. Except the song was extraordinary. The thing is, the people running the major labels didn't see it. Stax passed on it. Atlantic passed on it. Multiple labels heard it and said no. The recording sat there, but the song had been recorded at Malaco Studios in Jackson, Mississippi, on the same day that producer Wardell Quizerg also cut King Floyd's Groove Me. 2 songs in one session at a brand new studio nobody had heard of. Groove Me came out and hit #1 on the R&B chart in early 1971. And the moment it did, somebody at Stax remembered that other tape. They went back and got it. They released Mr. Big Stuff in the spring of 1971, and it flew. Who do you think you are? Mr. Big Stuff. #1 on the R&B chart for 5 weeks. 5 weeks. #2 on the pop chart, kept out of the top spot by the Bee Gees' How Can You Mend a Broken Heart, Grammy nominated, double platinum. Who do you think you are, Mr. Big Stuff? And for those 5 weeks that it held down #1 R&B, the song it kept out of the top spot was Gladys Knight and the Pips' I Don't Want to Do Wrong. 2 women named Knight battling it out at the top of the charts. I know. And that's a coincidence worth sitting with. Do you think I can afford to give you my love? Gene Knight barely got a follow-up. Stax had issues with her producers, and her contract ended before the momentum could build. She went back to her life. The song lived without her. Some of y'all grew up hearing Mr. Big Stuff coming out of somebody's kitchen. You already know that feeling. Number 12, Shirley Brown, Woman to Woman, 1974.
Every piece of food we eat You see, I make it possible.
She didn't plan the opening line of this song. She walked into the studio in Memphis in 1974. She heard the track the writers had brought in, and then she did something nobody had asked her to do. She picked up an imaginary phone and started talking directly to the other woman.
Can't you see where I'm coming from?
Hello, may I speak to Barbara? Barbara, this is Shirley. She made that up on the spot, improvised the entire spoken intro in the studio, and that improvisation became one of the most recognized openings in the history of soul music. People still quote it in everyday conversation 50 years later. The song was Woman to Woman, Shirley Brown, #1 R&B for 2 weeks in November 1974, number 22 on the pop chart, over 1 million copies sold before December. And here's the part that makes it heavier. This was the last major hit that Stax Records would ever release. The label that gave us Otis Redding, Sam and Dave, Isaac Hayes, a label that was at the absolute center of American music for over a decade, was going under. Bankruptcy was coming, and Shirley Brown's debut single was the final light before the building went dark.
Hope you understand.
Stax folded in 1975. Shirley Brown, who had just sold 1 million records with her very first national release, lost her label, her momentum, and her platform all at once. She'd spent 9 years before this moment honing her craft on the road with blues guitarist Albert King, who had discovered her at 14 years old, singing in a club in Illinois. 9 years of dues to get one shot at the top.
The clothes on his back, I buy them. The car he drives.
She was nominated for a Grammy she didn't win. Her follow-up single went nowhere without a label pushing it. And the song that proved everything she had in her just sat there, perfect and stranded. If you know this song, you know it goes deeper than a phone call. It goes all the way to the bone. Number 11, the Delfonics, Didn't I Blow Your Mind This Time, 1970. There was no money. That's where this story starts. Tom Bell had been working with the Delfonics at Cameo Parkway Records in Philadelphia. He believed in these three singers, William Hart, his brother Wilbert, and Randy Kane, the way a producer only believes in something when he knows it's real. But when they got into the studio, there was nothing in the budget for a full orchestra. No string players, no brass section. So Tom Bell played most of the instruments himself, and what he created, Didn't I Blow Your Mind This Time, 1970, Philly Groove Records, won a Grammy Award for Best R&B Vocal Performance by a Duo or Group. Number 3 on the R&B chart. Number 10, Pop, Gold Record. That lush, pillowy sound that feels like it has 40 musicians on it. One man, making do with what he had. The Delfonics by that point had already had hits. La La, Means I Love You, from 1968 had put them on the map. But this song went deeper. The lead vocalist William Hart wrote the lyric, a man asking one more time whether this time he finally got through to the woman he loves. Not demanding, not angry, just asking with everything he has left. And then, 27 years later, Quentin Tarantino put it in Jackie Brown, and a whole new generation discovered it. A bail bondsman named Max Cherry hears it playing from Pam Grier's record player, and in a scene with no dialogue, you watch a middle-aged man fall in love. The song does all the work. It doesn't need anything else. If you've ever tried to reach someone who just wasn't hearing you, not because they didn't care, but because the distance between two people can be a real place, you know what this song is asking. Number 10, Curtis Mayfield, Freddie's Dead, theme from Superfly, 1972. Here's what most people get wrong about this song. They hear Freddie's Dead and they think Curtis Mayfield was glorifying the drug game, the street life, the world of Superfly. But Curtis himself was doing something completely different. He was writing a funeral. He was standing over the casket of a young man chewed up by a system that never offered him a real way out, and he was calling it by its name. Freddie wasn't a hero. Freddie was a warning, and the song was a tragedy. Everybody's misused him. Curtis Mayfield wrote the entire Superfly soundtrack in 1972, and this single hit number 4 on both the R&B and pop charts. But what makes it remarkable isn't the chart position. It's the fact that Mayfield wrote a political manifesto inside a film soundtrack and got it played at block parties. Think about that. A song about addiction, poverty, and the machinery that keeps whole communities trapped, and it was everywhere. Your uncle had it. Your neighbor had it. The car down the street with the windows down had it. And here's what most people don't know. The film's producers reportedly weren't happy with Mayfield's darker take on the material. They wanted something more celebratory of the lifestyle. Curtis Mayfield refused to celebrate it. He made it a protest record and put it inside a blaxploitation film, and the film became a classic partly because of the tension between what the screen showed and what the music was actually saying. Honestly, Freddie's Dead might be the most important soul record of the 70s that people forget to put in that category. A lot of people hear it as a groove. A lot fewer hear it as a warning. But if you grew up in a neighborhood where you knew who Freddie was, where you could put a real face to that character, you heard it exactly the way Curtis intended. I'm sure all would agree that this misery. Number 9, the O'Jays, Backstabbers, 1972. The piano riff comes in first, slow, a little ominous, like somebody clearing their throat before they say something you need to hear. And then the O'Jays come in and tell you about the men who smile in your face all the time trying to take your place. I keep getting all these visits from my friends. The Backstabbers, Philadelphia International Records, number 1 R&B, number 3 on the pop chart. Written by Leon Huff, Gene McFadden, and John Whitehead, and produced by Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff, the architects of what the world was starting to call the Philadelphia sound. This was a different kind of soul. Gamble and Huff built these records with orchestras and message and precision. Every instrument placed exactly where it needed to be. The O'Jays had been around since the late 50s, a group from Canton, Ohio, who'd been singing through different lineups and different labels for over a decade before they signed with Philadelphia International and finally caught everything they'd been working toward. What they do? Backstabbers became their signature, but here's what people often miss. The song isn't just about romantic betrayal. Gamble and Huff had seen enough of the music business to know exactly what kind of men they were writing about. The suits, the handshakes, the industry smiles. This was a warning delivered as a groove. And it worked precisely because the groove was so undeniable that people danced to it before they processed what they were dancing to. You fellas who have someone and you really care. The O'Jays would go on to Love Train, For the Love of Money, a full decade of greatness. But this was the moment you knew they weren't just singers, they were saying something. Some of y'all have met a backstabber or two in your time. You know the type. You know. Number 8, the Chai Lights, Oh Girl, 1972. I just don't know how. Eugene Record wrote this song in his basement apartment. He was the lead singer of the Chi-Lites, and he wrote demos on a tiny one-track tape recorder, playing every part himself, guitar, drums, all of it, in a small space in Chicago.
Don't know where to go, who to see it.
That's where most of the Chi-Lites classics came from. Not a big studio, not a fancy setup, a basement and a man who couldn't stop writing. Oh Girl was one of those basement recordings, and it became the Chi-Lites' first and only #1 hit on the pop chart. May 1972. #1 R&B for 2 weeks. Now, how did it get there?
They say, let the woman take care of.
The Chi-Lites were scheduled to appear on the Flip Wilson Show, one of the highest rated programs on television at the time. They were going to sing their current hit, Have You Seen Her? But they also played the Flip Wilson Team, a recording of Oh Girl, and the recording wasn't even finished. The strings hadn't been added yet. It was just the rhythm track and the harmonica. The TV people heard it and said, play that one instead. They performed Oh Girl on national television half finished, and it took off. There's also a detail about this record that almost no one talks about. The engineer on the session was Bruce Sweetian, a man who would later go on to record and engineer albums for Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson. The engineer who worked on Thriller got his footing in a Chicago studio cutting a Chi-Lites ballad. And then in 2003, Beyonce built Crazy in Love, partly around a sample from another Chi-Lites record. Eugene Record, who had died earlier that year, received a Grammy writing credit because the basement work outlasts everything. #7, the Stylistics, Betcha by Golly Wow, 1972. You probably have a very specific memory attached to this song. You don't just remember it. You remember a moment that it was playing during. A face, a room, a particular kind of quiet that felt like the whole world had decided to slow down for exactly the length of this record. That's what Tom Bell and Linda Creed built when they wrote Betcha by Golly Wow for the Stylistics in 1972. The arrangement, the melody, the words, all of it is designed to create that feeling of standing still inside something beautiful and knowing it while it's happening, which is almost impossible to do in a song. Russell Tompkins Jr. sang lead. His voice, that impossibly high, impossibly tender falsetto, lands somewhere between a prayer and a confession. You believe every word. And you believe it the moment it comes out of him. But here's the part of this story I think about most. Linda Creed, Tom Bell's co-writer, the woman whose words are at the center of this and a dozen other Stylistics classics, was diagnosed with breast cancer in the mid-70s. She kept writing through it. She kept working. And the last major song she wrote before she died at 37 in 1986 was The Greatest Love of All. Which George Benson recorded first, and Whitney Houston later turned into one of the most iconic recordings of the entire decade that followed. A woman who spent years writing about love and joy and tenderness for other people's voices, and then wrote about finding strength inside yourself from inside her own devastating situation. The Stylistics gave you the romance, and the story behind it gave you the gravity. Stay with me, because the next 5 entries are where this list changes. #6, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, 1971. Before this song was released, Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown Records, the man who had built the most successful black-owned record label in American history, heard it and called it the worst thing he'd ever recorded. He refused to release it. Think about that for a moment. The man who had given the world Stevie Wonder, The Temptations, The Four Tops, Diana Ross and the Supremes, that man heard What's Going On and told Marvin Gaye it was unmarketable. Too political, too soft. Nobody wants to hear this. Marvin Gaye told Motown he would never record another song for them if they didn't release it. They released it. What's Going On hit number 2 on the pop chart in 1971 and number 1 R&B. The album it came from is widely considered one of the greatest ever made in any genre. And the song itself began with a story that Ronaldo Obi Benson of the Four Tops brought to Gaye. Benson had witnessed police clashing with anti-war protesters at a rally in Berkeley, California, and couldn't stop thinking about it. That image became the seed of the entire record. A member of one group handed off a moment he couldn't let go to a member of another group, who turned it into something that outlasted everyone who created it. Marvin Gaye was asking a question in 1971 that still doesn't have a clean answer. And if you heard it as a teenager, lying on the floor with headphones on, trying to figure out what kind of world you'd inherited, I think you know exactly what I mean when I say this song isn't a memory, it's still present. And whether that's comforting or haunting, I'll let you decide for yourself. Number 5, The Spinners, I'll Be Around, 1972. This song was not supposed to be the single. It was the B-side, the flip side of a record the label believed in called How Could I Let You Get Away? The Spinners had just left Motown, where they'd spent years in the shadow of bigger acts and never gotten the real push they deserved. And they had signed with Atlantic Records. And Atlantic had just connected them with producer Tom Bell, which was, as it turned out, one of the most important decisions in the history of Philadelphia soul. Bell heard what the Spinners had. He heard the blend, the texture, the emotional range, and he wrote and produced I'll Be Around for them, and the label put it on the back of the record. Then the DJ started flipping it. I'll Be Around hit number 1 on the R&B chart and number 3 on the pop chart. The song the label believed in barely charted. This became the beginning of one of the most consistent hit runs in 70s soul. Now it's up to me. Could it be I'm Falling in Love, One of a Kind, Love Affair, Then Came You? All of it following from a B-side that became an A-side because the audience knew before the label did. That happens more than the industry ever wants to admit. But the lyric of I'll Be Around is what keeps bringing people back. It's a breakup song. A man is letting a woman go and telling her he'll be waiting if she ever comes back. No bitterness, no demands, just the quiet dignity of a man who knows his own worth and refuses to pretend it doesn't hurt. If you've ever loved someone and had the grace to let them walk away without making it ugly, you know what this song costs to sing. Number 4, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. If You Don't Know Me By Now, 1972.
Now, baby, I know the difference.
Most people didn't know his name yet. Harold Melvin was the front man, the promoter, the name on the marquee. His group had been performing since the late 50s, grinding through the rhythm and blues circuit, building a following without ever quite breaking through to the national audience they deserved. And then there was the drummer, Teddy Pendergrass, who Harold Melvin had initially hired to sit behind a kit, not to stand at a microphone. But Teddy Pendergrass's voice was something you couldn't keep behind a drum kit for long. Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff heard it, understood it, and wrote If You Don't Know Me By Now for it. They also, if you listen to the story behind the lyric, Dee wrote it about something true. A long relationship where two people think they know each other and discover that knowing someone's face is not the same as knowing their interior life.
Should understand me like I understand you.
Philadelphia International Records, #1 R&B, #3 pop, inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, and the sound of Teddy Pendergrass on that record, that raw, searching, almost desperate reach in his voice, announced something that the whole decade would confirm. This was one of the great voices in the history of American music. When Simply Red covered the song in 1989, it hit #1 in the UK, a different version of the same ache 17 years later with the same result. Because the question at the center of that song doesn't age. You can be with someone for 30 years and still be asking it,
Just trust in me like I trust in.
If this song has ever made you think about a specific person in your life, someone who you thought knew you, or someone who you realized you didn't know nearly as well as you thought, you're not alone, not even close.
If you don't.
#3, Minnie Riperton, Lovin' You, 1975. Stevie Wonder asked Minnie Riperton and her husband, Richard Rudolph, for their most embarrassing song. They were recording the Perfect Angel album in 1974, and Wonder, who was co-producing while technically under contract to Motown, which meant he had to be listed on the credits as El Toro Negro, Spanish for the Black Bull because Taurus was his zodiac sign, thought the album needed one more track. He asked them for something they'd never planned to release, something private, so they gave him Lovin' You, which Minnie had originally written as a lullaby, not a love song, a lullaby. She'd sing it to her baby daughter to get her to sleep, and it was just something between a mother and her child. Their most embarrassing song, their most personal thing, April 5th, 1975. Each are #1 on the pop chart. #3 R&B.
Please stay with me while we grow.
The radio edit had to cut out the end of the track because Minnie had recorded herself softly singing her daughter's name, Maya, 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 and the DJs thought it was a religious chant. That daughter grew up to be Maya Rudolph, who you know from Saturday Night Live, from Bridesmaids, from a career that has nothing to do with this song and everything to do with who raised her. Minnie Riperton was diagnosed with breast cancer. She kept touring, kept recording, became a national spokesperson for the American Cancer Society, one of the first celebrities to speak publicly about a breast cancer diagnosis. She performed with her right arm immobilized toward the end. She died on July 12th, 1979. She was 31 years old. You know, her epitaph reads, "Loving you is easy 'cause you're beautiful." That's her own lyric, written as a lullaby, set over her forever. I've talked about a lot of songs on this list that had complicated stories behind them. This one is just beautiful and then devastating. There's no other way to say it. #2, Billy Paul, Me and Mrs. Jones, 1972. Radio stations refused to play this song. Not at first. At first, the program directors and station managers heard it and said no. The song was about a man having an affair with a married woman. And not just admitting it, celebrating it, yearning for it, telling you in exquisite detail that he knew it was wrong and he was going to keep doing it anyway.
So much, it hurts so much inside.
We both know it's wrong, but it's much too strong to let it go now. They said the public wouldn't accept a song like that without any moral judgment attached. No apology, no lesson, just the honest confession of a man in love with a woman he has no business loving. And then the public decided otherwise.
Why would you play a favorite song?
Billy Paul had been around Philadelphia's music scene since the early 50s. He was a jazz singer, sophisticated, trained, with a vocal style he'd built partly by listening to female singers like Nina Simone and Carmen McRae, because in his view, they did more with their voices than anyone else.
We got a thing.
He'd met Gamble and Huff years earlier. He'd waited a long time for the right song. Me and Mrs. Jones became Philadelphia International Records' very first #1 hit, the label's first. #1 pop for 3 weeks in December 1972. #1 R&B for 4 weeks. Grammy for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance. Which Billy Paul won over Ray Charles, Curtis Mayfield, and Isaac Hayes. Think about that room. He later admitted he tried to get Elvis Presley to join his band when they were both stationed at the same military base in Germany. Elvis passed. Billy Paul passed away in 2016. This song was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. But the thing that nobody who actually remembers this song needs an institution to tell them is how it felt the first time it came on. That opening saxophone, that first verse, the way Billy builds from a whisper to something that fills a whole room. Some things don't need validation, they're just true.
Every day at the same cafe.
#1, Al Green, Let's Stay Together, 1972.
Let me say it, sing.
There is no better description of this record than the one Al Green himself gave it, and he didn't give it many words. He just sang it. Let's stay together, loving you whether times are good or bad, happy or sad. That's it. That's the whole promise.
You're sad.
Nothing clever, nothing hidden. Just a man asking with everything he has for the thing that most people spend their whole lives wanting and never quite being able to hold on to. Willie Mitchell produced Let's Stay Together at High Records in Memphis in 1971. And the High Records sound was its own universe. Warm, deep, unhurried, like the music had all the time in the world to get where it was going. Mitchell knew what Al Green's voice needed. Space, room to breathe, nothing in the way between the voice and whoever was listening. The single hit #1 on the pop chart in January 1972. #1 R&B, one of the best-selling soul singles of the entire decade. Rolling Stone has put it in the top 10 greatest songs ever recorded. And then in 1974, everything changed. A woman named Mary Woodson, with whom Green had a relationship, came to his home. During an argument, she threw a pot of boiling grits on him. He suffered severe burns. She took his gun and ended her own life in his home that same night. Al Green never fully explained what happened that night publicly. He said it changed him at a level he couldn't describe. Within a few years, he had given himself fully to the ministry. He became Pastor Al Green of the Full Gospel Tabernacle Church in Memphis, Tennessee, where he still leads services today. He returned to secular music eventually, but the man who sang Let's Stay Together, that man who stood at a microphone and made a simple, devastating promise about love, That man went through something that none of the charts or the awards or the recognition could touch. And Let's Stay Together outlived all of it. It outlived the decade. It's in movies and television shows and wedding playlists and late night drives and first dances and last dances. Because what it promises is the one thing that every person who has ever loved anyone has wanted to be able to keep. If you were a 70s kid and this song was in your house, you already know. And if you're hearing this story for the first time, now you know the full weight of it.